God, I thank you so much for a chance to gather even separately tonight, Lord. And I thank you for just as not fun as Zoom can be sometimes, Lord, it is a gift to be able to still see all these faces and to hear from one another. And yeah, just to come together and just learn more about what you're doing in this body of believers, Lord. I thank you so much for those that are leaning in, Lord. And I pray that this time tonight will just be encouraging and beneficial, Lord. I pray that it will be clarifying. And yeah, I pray that you'll just help us as we continue to move one step closer to what you are calling us to. I pray all these things in your name. Amen.
But before we walk through kind of the core team practices document that we sent out, I want to kind of take a moment and go back to the kind of foundation that we have talked about and revisit the values and priorities that we discussed earlier this fall, because it's those things that are leading to our church plants practices that we see for 2021. So if you'll indulge me, I want to look back at those, kind of remind us of where we've been, talk through the practices, which is where we are presently as we cast vision for a new church, and then look at a few next steps or mention where we go from here. So we'll pause and take questions along the way. But as far as where we've been, we say this in Soma a lot. It's the church family that our church will be part of and that I get the honor of helping serve nationally. But we say in Soma a lot that our being comes before our doing, or in other words, who we are. And this is true both personally and also as a church, but who we are shapes how we act. And so who we are is that we're God's family. We're daughters and sons of God. We're sisters and brothers to each other. And who we are is that we're God's missionaries. We'll see in John 17 here in a few weeks that Jesus specifically prayed that God wouldn't take us out of the world, but instead that God would send us into the world for his purposes. And so in other words, because of who God is and because of the great works that God has done, because of his good news, because of the gospel of Jesus, who we are is disciples of Christ. And all of that leads to the mission statement that we've cast for Salt and Light community, following Jesus's great commission that he gave just before he ascended, and following his prayer that God's kingdom come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The mission statement for our new church is making disciples of Jesus by seeking his kingdom in everyday life. I'm going to say it again because that matters. We want to be about making disciples of Jesus by seeking his kingdom in everyday life. And then to flesh that mission statement out, since we believe that Jesus's life and death and resurrection changes everything, we also believe that by his Spirit, God has given us a new identity and he invites us into a new life and a new way of living. And so we've said, and several of you have read the kind of values and priorities document, but we've said that we want to pursue this life of discipleship together by consistently seeking three different things. One, being with Jesus. Two, becoming like Jesus. And three, doing what Jesus did. And so I'm not going to flesh all of that out again. We've talked about it with many of you. We're happy to talk with you about it again in the coming months. And we'll frankly talk about it a lot over the years that we're a church together. But the order of those three things is really important. Because if we go out and just try to do the things Jesus did, or if we try to become like him without first being with him, we end up empty and we end up pursuing this unsustainable, really wearying task, and we may miss the whole heart and soul behind what we're trying to be about anyway. And so the first aspect of discipleship, just as a little bit of a review, is being with Jesus. And what does it look like? That looks like pursuing spiritual abiding, in that we want to grow together in what it looks like to just dwell with Christ, to see the fruit of the Spirit in our lives and in others' lives. We want to pursue spiritual practices and grow together in finding God through his word and through prayer, and through creativity and various forms of worship, and through things like practicing Sabbath and pursuing rest. And we want to pursue spiritual growth together and grow in seeking holiness and repenting and forgiving one another, which nobody likes to do, frankly, and want to grow together in loving God and loving neighbors and even loving our enemies. And so in summary, being with Jesus means that we want to live all of life centered on his word, his Spirit, and his kingdom. The second pursuit is that as we spend time with Jesus, we increasingly want to become like Jesus. And to summarize, becoming like Jesus means that we want to give our lives for God and for others. If you look at what Jesus was like, that's a lot of what he was like, was giving up his life for God and for others. And so our prayer is that this will happen. We'll become like Jesus as we pursue selfless conversations. We want to grow together in speaking and receiving the gospel in each other's lives, and seeing how the fruit of the gospel impacts even the smallest little moments of our own lives and others. And we also want to speak the gospel increasingly in winsome ways with those who don't yet believe in Jesus. We want to pursue becoming like Jesus through selfless generosity, and grow over time in using our home and our time and our possessions and our finances and our spiritual gifts and on and on and on. Use everything we have for God and others. And we want to pursue spiritual acts, which is kind of the bucket that contains things like giving voice and resource to fight injustice in the name of the Lord Jesus, and reconcile brokenness, and pursue people on society's fringes, and break down the many dividing walls that exist within and outside of God's church. And the third form of discipleship that we want to pursue together by the power of the Spirit is that as we become like Jesus, as we spend time with Jesus, as we become like Jesus, our prayer is that it becomes increasingly natural for all of us to do what Jesus did in our everyday lives. And so as Salt and Light community, we want to pursue sincere priorities. We'll talk about these more in December. We haven't covered these yet, but we want to pursue sincere priorities, and together fight the busyness and distraction and excess that surrounds us all the time, and instead pursue the things that God values. We want to pursue sincere relationships. We want to learn each other's stories, whether it's little glimpses into each other's stories like Thanksgiving memories, or learning how the gospel changed us, and areas that the gospel hasn't changed us yet. We want to learn each other's stories. We want to value all people's gifts and perspectives and experiences, and give grace in each other's differences. And we want to pursue sincere discipleship, and own one another's growth, and practice the over 100 one another commands that we see in the Bible. Want to be trained and be sent into mission and ministry. And so again, that's a document that hopefully you've seen, hopefully you've read a little bit of, but I want to go back to that and say that those are our church's values. That's how we're going to pursue discipleship for the years to come, based on God's gospel and in the new identity he gives us, and by the ongoing work of God the Spirit in our lives. And those values lead us to prioritize becoming a simple and relational and intentional church family. We want, as Salt and Light, we want to be a church family with simple and interactive gatherings. We want to be a church where everyone is being discipled and everyone is discipling someone. We want to be a church where we both equip teens and kids and parents, and also pursue transformative cultural engagement. And we want to be a church where we value the responsibility of male elders while empowering everyone's gifting, and seeing women and men lead together in various aspects of mission and ministry. And so that's where we've been. Those are the values and priorities we've discussed since September or so. Hopefully you started to see us even model some of those in those strange gatherings we get to have online on every other Sunday evening. But that recap matters, because it's those values and priorities that shape where we are now as we discuss this core team season that we're entering into. So I'll pause before we kind of move into core team practices. Any questions, or Tatum's or Jess, would y'all add anything to that or clarify anything that I missed? Okay. Then based on those values and priorities, let's turn to kind of where we are now. We sent a document of core team practices earlier this week. There were a few proofreading edits, so I just put an updated version in the chat on Zoom. But as I've said, there's lots of different ways to live out those values and priorities. And one thing that the Tatums and we Conleys have said, and have even talked about with several of you, is that we want to aim for God's kingdom and then trust that Jesus is going to build his church. We don't want to focus so much on the organization that we miss God's kingdom. And so we want to be prayerful. We want to be slow in seasons where that makes sense. We want to be intentional and follow what the Spirit is doing rather than potentially getting ahead of him. And so to that end, what we put in front of you in that core team practices is probably not what we'll do forever as a church. And we might even change things within the midst of a core team season if the Spirit leads us to. And instead, we just want to view the first several months of 2021 as a core team season, and focus on doing a few things well rather than trying to do a lot of things and end up doing them all poorly. And of course, we're going to have to hold everything loosely, because it's the first year of a church, and because God or COVID or a number of other things could change our plans anyway. So I'm not going to read every word of that document. Hopefully you got to glance at it before this call. If not, you have it in your emails. But as an overview, there are 4 practices that we want to aim for and that we hope will start in January. And the first practice is that we hope for weekly in-person and also separate weekly Zoom gatherings starting in January, pending COVID. So we're basically going to have two services. We'll have an in-person service and an online service, if you want to think about it like that. A common theme among both pastors that I get to work with across the country and also participants who stream into any live stream of churches in-person gathering, a common theme is that no one seems to like it very much, and it's hard. And folks online end up feeling uninvolved, or like you're kind of watching an event that's happening in person. And that kind of a mindset that you're just watching or observing from afar goes against our value and priorities of pursuing relationship, pursuing interactive gatherings. And so we want to acknowledge and create gatherings for worship, for various forms of worship, for teaching, for discussion. Want to acknowledge and create gatherings for folks with varied COVID sensitivities. We know that some folks are ready and raring to meet in person. And we also know that others aren't. We know that folks get sick or travel periodically. We even want to create a space for folks who serve, perhaps with kids, during an in-person gathering to have an opportunity to worship together as well. And so we're hoping to start 2021 with an in-person gathering, which will include some COVID precautions. We're looking to do that on Sunday mornings. No promises on that yet. As well as starting 2021 by making this 8:00 p.m. Sunday Zoom meeting a weekly rhythm as a second weekly gathering. What does that look like? Both gatherings will involve elements like we've participated in this fall, psalms, prayers, teaching and discussing verses that we hope that we'll all read in advance, communion. We'll add in some celebration and stories along the way. We're trying to navigate what it looks like to sing, at least the in-person gathering. Again, all things held loosely, but at least the in-person gathering will likely involve singing and that kind of stuff. And so that's the first thing that we want to focus on, the first practice for our core team season. The second is what we're calling missional DNA groups. And the reality is that every disciple of Jesus must be deeply known. Some of our values and priorities that I already mentioned are intentional discipleship relationships. We want to take responsibility for one another's growth. And so we want to start establishing these really through the rest of the year and into January. And these DNA groups will focus less on the structure of the group and more on the discipleship that happens in the group. So in other words, we're going to try to keep these groups as simple and relational as possible, but add just enough trellis to help folks find a group and thrive once they're in that group. And so those of you coming from City Church, as a point of reference, you might think of this as looking like something between a city group and a fight club. Or perhaps it'll take on some elements of both of those. We see there being a lot of flexibility in that there's no set size for what these DNA groups can look like. It might be 3 single gender folks or 10 mixed gender families. The point is that we want these to be the place where deep knownness is fostered and regular engagement with each other can happen. And however they look, the goal of DNAs is threefold: to go deep, to build up, and then to send out. DNA stands for discover truths of God and each other, discover, D. The N is nurture one another toward true heart transformation. There's that discipleship aspect, heart level discipleship there. And then the A is act out repentance and belief through obedience and gospel proclamation. So discover, nurture, act, DNA. And then part of the DNA is to enter into each other's mission fields together. Perhaps that's active and you're actually able to go serve and be on mission literally side by side. But it at least needs to take on a supportive role in that you're encouraging and praying for each other's mission fields. It's primarily in this space that everyone will know how we're all doing in our mission of making disciples of Jesus by seeking his kingdom in everyday life. So weekly gatherings, both in person and then later online, and missional DNA groups. Those are the first two practices for our core team season. Let me pause there. Any questions about those two practices? Or Jess, Tatum's, anything to add or clarify?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So we were in a missional community for a few years in Indiana. And then when we lived in Australia, we started the DNA groups, but we hadn't done that before. So like from my understanding of that, that's generally limited to 3 people because each person would share and then you would have a time of praying just for that person. Like it was supposed to be kept to like about an hour or whatever, but then you would have time in scripture as well. So like I know for us, 3 women, kind of chatty, it was hard for us to even keep it to an hour. So I'm trying to imagine that format working with 10 people and different sexes and families. So could you, I mean, are you thinking it's going to, the format won't be exactly the same, or how would that transfer to a bigger group?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that every experience matters. I also think there can be some flexibility. And again, I get to speak in this weird 2-hat role of getting to work with so many churches across the US and the world. So I know the structure you're talking about very well. And so I think the one of the dangers of that, and one of the dangers that some of us have experienced in trying to lead out in churches is by focusing so much on the structure that there's an ability for things to flex a little bit, but to let the structure be too restrictive. And so by all means, I think that if that level of knownness works for 3 to 4 ladies and that kind of stuff, and that's the capacity for what a discipleship relationship can look like, and supporting one another and that kind of stuff, then that's fantastic. I think we just don't want to say that's the only way that it can look. And by bringing some of the elements of like a traditional missional community into Sundays, for example, if we're potentially sharing a meal, some Sundays, if we're taking some time to discuss and not just teach the scriptures on Sundays, then it also frees up some more time for what can happen during those other non-Sunday spaces whenever they occur. So trying to flex a little bit and to be a little bit more fluid than rigid, if that makes sense. Does that help, Laura? Okay, got a thumbs up. It's a good question. Any others?
Hi, Ben Ford. I'm curious. So when we first joined City Church, the small groups were or whatever we call them, was the like front door of the church. Like people join in the small group and then eventually the gather. And then last couple of years, City Church changed that to like the service was front door, and then you get kind of filtered into that. And I know that this is a core team season, but I didn't know if like these are open or closed, or like these are supposed to grow. That sounded like I was going to say something more, but that was it.
Tatum's, you want to jump? I'm talking a lot, so I'm wanting to give space for Tatum's or Jess to jump in if they want to.
I don't know. That's a good question, and I think that's. I think we're gonna probably have to figure a few of these things out. I think that kind of the heart behind doing like really what we had at City Church, and our experience is that we had Sundays, we had fight clubs, we had missional communities. We asked you to be out like on mission, like getting to know your neighbors. And then oftentimes many of us were serving, some capacity in the church. And also we've got this reality that we have a lot of like kids that are getting older now. And so we've got ministry that we want to be doing with them, discipling them. And so part of the thinking of kind of combining a couple of these things and just having Sundays and missional DNA groups as kind of being the two places where you're kind of doing life and discipling one another is just not trying to put too much on people's plates that they weren't able to accomplish all those things or feel like they were dropping something or doing one of those things poorly. So could we do those things with kind of two buckets? As far as where you invite people in, I think Sunday will definitely be a place that we will want you to be able to invite people into that. Missional DNA groups, I think it kind of depends on again, the flexibility and the structure that you guys are doing together. If it is a pretty small group where you're kind of intimately walking through some stuff in that season, it might not be the best place for that. And so I think that you can talk about that as a group together. But I don't know that I have a hard, fast perspective on that at this point.
Yeah, I'll echo that and say I think that's the details will need to be worked out. I think that one of the things we want to consistently keep in front of all of us is that inviting someone into the church is less about which event they come into and more about the relationships. And that's something we've said a lot. Everybody on this call, I think, has heard to some degree, like the church is people, and yet we're so trained and so kind of conditioned to invite people to some event or both events in this case, or that kind of stuff. And so I think that really trying to consistently move toward, putting our money where our mouth is, both for us as leaders and then for the community that God built, is to say inviting someone into church is to invite them into life and relationship more than it is one of these two set things. And in saying all this, again, like we're casting this vision right now, we're gonna take time, December into January and make sure that whether we have past experiences in missional communities or small groups or DNA groups or life groups or discipleship groups or whatever else, we want to make sure and take the time that we as elders and others equip our community well for this. And so we're not just saying, all right, missional DNA groups, they start on November 22nd, get after it, good luck. We want to just introduce these now and build together over time. I'm going to move on to the other two practices for our core team season. The third one is that since discipleship is not just for adults, the third element of this season is discipling kids and students and parents. And so on one hand, and especially recognizing the different, COVID sensitivities and different families and this kind of thing, want to form a team of folks who will continue to send out. I'm sorry, Sarah just asked. Apparently I'm moving on too quickly. Sarah, do you have a question you'd like to add?
Yeah, sorry. I was waving, but I may not be on your screen.
Yeah.
So. Can you say again, Ben, what you said, like the DNA groups are for this, and then like sending out? And then what, so is the goal that you would kind of be fluid and like not expect to be together for 5 years kind of thing, but like you always come in with a goal of creating new, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I don't know if I have a 100% answer. I think that we all are going to walk in that tension of going deep with each other and also sending out. And over time, I could see some groups, very much going like, hey, this is a season that we need to stay together. And if there's other groups that need to be formed, even as you do live on mission and bring someone else into life and a relationship, we'll want to see them in this same kind of relationship. And so there could be, by the power of the Spirit, a moment where it's like, this thing has been good, but I think I'm called to replicate and multiply out and start another one of these and be sent out for the sake of others getting to experience the goodness of this. And at the same time, the alternative could be true as well of there, perhaps there's a few folks who want to start a group together. And so my nature is to be more black and white, more like, oh, this is how it has to be and this kind of stuff. So I'm trying to fight that. We're trying to fight that and go like, let's not think about it, but let's also take it a little bit more on a fluid case by case basis. It's a good question. Sorry, I did not pause to answer. So anyway, back to kids and students and parents. Yeah, I was saying on one hand, we want to form a team who will continue to send out kids lessons at home and start to develop and send out and suggest resources to equip parents as well. And on the other hand, we want to start fostering safe and engaging spaces during things like in-person gatherings once we can do this. All of this, of course, will be to come alongside parents and equip parents and foster kids' relationships with Jesus through age-specific peer relationships and discipleship. And so we foresee kids being welcome to stay with parents during Sunday gatherings, if that's your family's conviction, and also age-specific options on Sundays as well. Likely, not concrete, but likely, there'll be a preschool option during the majority of a Sunday in-person gathering, and then perhaps an option for elementary kids during the sermon or a shorter portion of that gathering. And we also want to plan ahead and recognize what might not exist on day one, but what we hope to develop as quickly as possible and make plans now for middle school and high school discipleship as well. Initial thoughts, again, not concrete, but that might happen in a separate space so they can be together as a church family in the gathering, so that perhaps there's a space for students after a gathering, and perhaps a rhythm of being all together in a large group, and then also mentored DNA groups as well. And then fourth and final practice, zooming back out, is that from day one, we want to empower everyone's gifts and passions. So our hope and dream would be that everyone finds ways to both declare the gospel in everyday relationships, and also to devote ourselves to seeking God's kingdom and displaying the gospel through our everyday actions and things like engaging in justice and engaging the poor and marginalized. But at the same time, and this is a learning from my own leadership in the past, so we also want to equip you to display and declare the gospel well, and to guard our church family from thinking that everybody has to be involved in every cause and every area of injustice. It can be overwhelming. It can be paralyzing to think that we have to be always engaged in everything. And frankly, again, instead of doing a couple things well, we could end up doing a lot of things poorly. And so we want to help everyone find, this may be overstated, but find one cause, one thing to devote yourself to and go all in on that. Some of you may have capacity for more than that, but hopefully that's a freeing thing, to say we want to equip you, but also free you from thinking you have to be involved in everything. And then related to that, Matt and I as elders, and then other gifted participants in Salt+Light, we want to come alongside you, each of you, and help you discover and thrive in your giftings and passions. We want to equip the saints in formal and informal ways for various aspects of mission and ministry and discipleship as we all give ourselves for the glory of God. So again, weekly gatherings, missional DNA groups, discipling kids and students and parents, and then empowering everyone's gifts and passions. Those are the things we see ourselves devoting time and effort and energy to in 2021. That's how we see the core team season looking for 6 to 9 months, give or take. Not 100% sure of the coming year. So yeah, Tatum's, anything to add, Jess? Other questions from anyone?
Hey, Ben, question on just going back to the DNA groups or discipleship, just, what really sticks out to me is this idea of knownness, and I think that's really important. I guess my question would have more to do with, like, as elders, like living out in discipleship, like what do you see either in other churches, pastors, doing that well? Like, what does that look like to model that, and to, what does that look like for you guys and the Tatums, to model that? Would y'all be doing DNA groups yourselves? Would y'all be, what would that look like? I guess would be the question.
See if Matt unmutes here. Yeah.
I would like us to be, I think that Tatum's and the Connollys will kind of maintain a leadership kind of relationship with each other, being a kind of, in a sense, a little bit of a missional DNA group ourselves, but I also see us being involved in other groups as well. Maybe participating, partially helping to lead those, practicing repentance and being in the Word together, and all the things that we're asking you to do. I expect it to be a very kind of practice-oriented leadership. So I don't know if you have. Yeah.
I think we really value for the way that I view leadership as being transparent and being vulnerable and going first is what makes a leader that I want to follow. And so I try to be that. And so that's something that we hold with a high priority, that we would have those relationships, that we are able to be vulnerable and transparent with one another. I never want to be in a leadership role where we are in a silo by ourselves. And so that's something that we take seriously in our relationships with others, but not just even excluding ourselves to other leaders, and I think that that's something that, we've always held in high regard with many of our relationships, and that's something that we will continue to hold. So.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, you have anything? Yeah, the only thing I would add is that one thing that we have talked about and will commit to is that whoever kind of raises their hand and says, yes, I'd love to be the point person for one of these DNAs, that we have to, by mandate, and we want to, by conviction, spend a lot of time in a discipleship relationship with the folks who are leading out in that as well. Not just kind of the, how's your group going? Okay, great. But actually, modeling for you, to answer your question, Curtis, and to echo what Nicole is saying, even in that relationship, we want to be in a discipleship relationship with you as a model, and also a support for you as you're discipling others, leading out and discipling others. Cool. So that's where we've been. That's where we are now. And then finally, I just want to talk for just 2 minutes on where we're going. Because we have not, and this has been intentional, we have not called for a commitment during this fall. We haven't given out contact information or created a directory or formed DNA groups or that kind of stuff this fall, because we wanted to shape and discuss with you our values and priorities. And we wanted to shape and discuss with you our core team practices, and even model some of those as best we could digitally, and give folks an opportunity to kind of dip your toe in, if you will. And on top of that, since we see church as family, like I said at the beginning, who are we? Because of the gospel, we're sisters and brothers to one another. And families have high commitments to one another. And so Salt+Light is going to value membership highly over time. And so we want to pursue it slowly and intentionally. But with all that said, it's time to start asking folks to prayerfully commit to help build Salt+Light, and to consider going all in with God and with one another over the course of 2021. And so as we move toward January, as we move toward kind of officially becoming a church, we want to start building teams out. I want to see folks foster discipleship by, as I already mentioned, kind of raising your hand and saying, I want to be a point person for a DNA group. I want to form a team to serve kids in teen discipleship. And beyond just teams, we want to know whose gifts and skills and passions are going to help shape various elements of mission and ministry in Salt+Light's first year. And so if you have that document, the back page, the bottom is a core team commitment that we formed. And we're not, you don't have to sign in blood before you get off the Zoom call tonight or anything like that. But we simply wanted to take a moment and pause this fall in this kind of family meeting night and invite you to go on this journey with us, and to commit to be part of Salt+Light from January through December of next year. And if you haven't read it yet, it's a fairly simple commitment. We tried to base it a lot on what we think the scriptures teach about God's mission and discipleship. And so it's essentially saying, yes, I will seek to be with Jesus and become like Jesus and do what Jesus did, as described in the values and priorities document that we've given you. And that you'll strive for healthy unity and good relationships and healthy, even robust conversation in each other's differences, all within kind of basic Christian orthodoxy. And so it's kind of hopefully a simple commitment, but a serious commitment. And so that's the next step. That's where we hope to go as we move into the holiday season, as we look toward January. If I can be frank, it'd be great to know who our core team is going to be for at least starting the church by December 31st. But we're happy to have as many conversations as we need to. If you do have more questions or want to talk more, or have concerns, or want to know what this looks like or that looks like, you've already seen we're okay saying we don't know 100%. And so we'd ask for that grace if we don't know. And also, if you know, like, yeah, I'm all in, you don't have to wait till January 31st either. You're free to sign and return that at any point. We don't know what all next year looks like. I think the Lord's brother James in James 4 tells us not to be so arrogant as to think we know what even the next few days look like. So we don't know what next year looks like, but I can promise there'll be ups and downs, and there'll be messiness in the core team season that we're entering into. COVID brings uncertainty, of course, but it's not just COVID. It's simply the first year of a church's ministry and mission. And we're going to be diligent. We're going to be intentional. We're going to be slow and prayerful, but it's a young and new and fragile church, like a brand new baby. And on top of that, we just trust that if we're really doing kingdom work, we're going to have to be fighting spiritual warfare and division and things like this. So we can promise there'll be ups and downs. But I think we can also promise, by God's grace, that 2021 will be really beautiful in the midst of whatever brokenness we see. And that we'll see God at work as we continue to follow his spirit in making disciples of Jesus by seeking his kingdom in everyday life as this budding core team of Salt+Light community. So that's where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Final thoughts, questions? Anything you haven't asked that you'd like to? Okay. Hey, Cam.
Ben, yeah, I was just thinking a little bit about this, and you've touched on this a little bit, but just thinking through like what you Jess, Matt, Nicole kind of vision. It's kind of like the process or the next steps to help guide people into what this forming of missional DNA groups look like. And I say the word process not to kind of say like, oh, like what is the full process to get there, but what do you kind of envision is like the steps to form that, since clearly these could look different based on a number of different factors, from, you know, life phase to family size to geography. Like, is there a best way to kind of guide people into kind of what fits best, or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what initially comes to mind is knowing who all's ready to take that step will be a first step, to overuse that term in the same sentence. Knowing who's ready to take the step will be a first step in being prepared for that. So, and yeah, I think that once this will not always be true. It won't always have to be kind of a centralized, have to commit to the church to start a DNA group. That will not be the forever case. But during this initial core team season, I think we want to know at least who's leaning in enough to say, yes, I want to be part of that. And then we can kind of navigate everything from those things you mentioned: intergenerational, monogenerational, geography, not having to drive 45 minutes to be part of a community that you see, you know, for 45 minutes once a week kind of thing. And then just even existing relationships and that kind of stuff. All of these things I think matter and want to factor in. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't know 100%, but it starts.
Move from there. Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
We decided against putting everyone's name in a hat, shaking it out, and just drawing names.
These are your new best friends. Good luck.
Wisdom about.
Yeah, that's right. Matt or Nicole, does one of you want to pray for us?
God, we just thank you for for another evening where we can gather together and trust that you are doing something, that you are forming a new community for your kingdom, God. God, I ask that you would help us to just pay attention to your spirit, that we would listen to how you are guiding each one of us, that we would seek you, and that we would follow where you want us to go, Lord. I pray that all of us would desire your kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. God, make that the heartbeat of each of us, that we would seek you, and as we seek you, we get to participate in your kingdom work here. Lord, be with us as we go into this holiday week. Lord, give us grateful hearts that are fixed upon you. And we ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. All right. I know there's a lot of info tonight. I know there's more structured info than some of you prefer, and there's probably less structured info than some of you prefer. So I'll post a video of this, and we'll send out the PDF again later this week. But we just wanted to try to be as comprehensive as possible with as much as we know going into the next season, and we don't know everything yet. So thanks for hanging in there with us. You're free to stick around if you have questions, and otherwise, happy Thanksgiving week, whatever this year's traditions and memories that are created hold for you. Also look for an Advent devotional in your inbox this week, and then we'll pick up with our digital core team gatherings and kid lessons on December 6th. If you would read John 16 before that day, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll see you then. Good night, everybody.